Welcome back to another episode of The Conscious Artist, a safe space for conversations around mental health awareness for musicians, artists, and all human beings. I am your host, Pallavi Mahidara. I'm a concert pianist and teacher, and I am absolutely thrilled that you are joining us today. My hope for this show is that it will give all of us a sense of solidarity and knowledge that we are not alone, and together, through these conversations, we can create more awareness and change for a healthier future. My guest today is the Secretary General of the Geza Foundation and Competition, as well as an agent. He has made his name in the classical music industry in various roles, including music management, advisory roles, and dramaturg. He is also an ambassador for Classique, where he offers invaluable knowledge and support to artists of their program. Please join me in welcoming Markus Wyler to The Conscious Artist. Markus, I'm delighted to have you here with us today.
Good morning. I'm also delighted.
We got to know each other a little bit this summer at the Classique Summer Retreat, and I very much enjoyed our conversations, both the casual ones as well as our formal panel discussion. And it really got me thinking about the dynamics and relationship between an agent and an artist. So I'm very much looking forward to chatting with you today about this topic. The role of an agent is to help develop the career of its client, but often it turns into the role of emotional manager, mentor, and sometimes even therapist, I would say. And so I'm curious to know, how would you personally define the role of an agent? What constitutes a healthy agent and artist dynamic in your opinion?
The problem is that you probably can't define it in one sentence because there's a general, let's say, flow of the world, which changes the whole music industry and how artists have to organize their careers and also how agents or managers need to work. And also, in my experience, it depends a lot on the particular instance. So I think, like if you went to a college to learn how to be an artist's manager, it would be very difficult for me to teach you because in every individual case, you need like an individual recipe. Maybe if you would want to put it into very general terms, I would say the good manager would obviously try and find work for the artist, protect the artist, advise, and be like somebody who the artist can bounce off all kinds of things which he needs or which bother him or which he needs to be solved during the course of his work. This can range from talking about programs, finding repertoire, up to organizing travels or not, negotiating contracts. It can be anything. And I think also because today's world is diversifying more and more, many people tend to employ different people now for different chores. Whereas originally you'd maybe have one agent or manager who would deal with everything. And here you have also a problem that if you diversify, you have specialists, but you don't really have anybody who coordinates everything well. And if you have a generalist, like me, in my experience and in my career, you can do many things, but you maybe don't specialize so much in a particular field. If I gave an example, like many people nowadays have PR people employed or social media specialists or travel agent maybe or something like this. Whereas before everything would have been done by the one management office.
I really like the way you said protect and advise, because it's quite an interesting dynamic, I think, between an agent and an artist. It also depends, like exactly what you said. It's so personal. It is so incredibly individual. And the relationship between an agent and an artist with, I don't know, maybe like a 20-year-old who's just starting their career, starting out into the world, and they have an agent that's been in the field for decades who is very experienced. That could be more almost like a teacher-mentor sort of relationship versus, an esteemed artist who's had their own decades of experience with a fellow agent of similar caliber in terms of experience. That might be more of an equal kind of relationship, right?
Absolutely. I think in abstract terms, I often think, and also in my experience, I've often seen it that at the beginning of your career, when you're young and not yet famous, not yet established, it's obviously very difficult to get into one of the big agencies, but that's what everybody aspires to, without maybe realizing that the services a big agency would give you aren't appropriate for that particular time in a moment in time. So you start off with a relatively small manager. Maybe it's just your auntie or your neighbor or somebody who feels very fondly and wants to help you and invests a lot of money and time also, which you can't afford to pay back. And then you kind of embark on a career, hopefully. And the bigger you grow and the more interesting you get, or the awareness you get in public, then the big agencies start waking up and poach you away from your original small agent, which in a way makes sense because at that point they can offer you the things you will need at that particular point in time. And then, very often in my experience, there comes a point where the artist realizes that he can actually dispense with a lot of services of a big agency and decides to go small again, either organizing everything by himself or by engaging a secretary or opening a little office of his own, because like he has all the contacts to the concert halls, all the other artists like big conductors or orchestras contact him directly. So basically he would need somebody who deals with the logistics. So it kind of grows, gets amplified, and then gets smaller again. I've worked in all fields more or less. The Geza Foundation in Zurich, which deals with young pianists. Its aim is, first of all, to organize a big piano competition, international piano competition every 3 years. But then it commits itself to help and mentor all the prize winners, not only the first prize winner, for a period for at least 3 years. Meaning, first of all, give them advice on whatever they need. And that's very individual because before you actually see the winners, you don't know who they are, how old they are, where they're from, and what they need. Then you try and find them concerts so that they get into a routine of playing regularly and get established in a certain level of concert organizations, let's say. And then hopefully after the 3 years, they will either be found or you can recommend them to a professional concert manager who will then take them over into their office.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I actually want to go back to something you said earlier. I kind of want to challenge you on something. You mentioned that every young artist hopes to be signed by a big agency. And while in theory, I would agree, because I think that that's what most young artists are told. That's what it means to be successful. I actually disagree that that's a reality. I, for one, for example, have never really thought that a big agency is the right fit for me. And we've talked about this before, but I self-managed for most of my life. And it was really interesting to hear you speak about sort of the cycle of life, of the cycle of the agency or cycle of management in an artist, sort of starting on your own, growing with a big agency, and at some point even choosing to go back to doing things yourself. I think there are a lot of advantages and disadvantages to being with a big agency, to being with a boutique agency, and to being self-managed. And we'll get more into that in a little bit. But I do want to talk about this sort of concept of individualized attention. I feel that it's something that is not spoken about enough when especially students or young artists are just starting out. Our industry, society in general, but our industry very often shows that there's only one or two ways to be successful. And I think a lot of, I would say maybe my generation and the younger generations are really breaking free from that and showing how there are so many ways to be an artist, so many ways to be creative. And I'm curious to know, from maybe more traditional agent background, how do you see this development of young artists and where the music industry is starting to go? Like, for example, with social media, there's so much that the artist actually takes on themselves. Like you were saying, you can either have a generalist agent or you can have many, many specialists. And at some point, it feels like the artist is having to become the PR person, the logistics person, the personal assistant, the videographer, the video editor, and then also at some point, even the agent themselves. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you've actually just touched two of the big topics which we spoke about last summer, and why I agreed to do this podcast, because I find them extremely important. One is the thing that there's, I think, in the world, a total misunderstanding of many artists, young and old, of what a manager actually does and doesn't do. I think because many artists, either they have no idea or they just sit together amongst one another and gossip about people, but never talk to a manager or never go to a management and see what they actually do. So they have these very strange, nebulous ideas of a world dominated by mafios, strange sharks who just push through people who are undeserving but maybe pay or by some way get into the top of the list of a big management, and without ever realizing what they have to contribute by themselves, and how the whole thing works from a business point of view, and how the whole industry, how the whole concert life works in addition to your own country or city, different countries, because it works differently everywhere else. And I think a lot of sort of bad feelings and misunderstandings come out of this. And I admired you so much because you said that you self managed for so many years. And that means for me, you actually really understand what it takes, because you've dealt with all aspects of concert promotion and management yourself. So I would hope that you have a bit more favorable understanding of the work of managers and the agencies. And the second theme, which I absolutely agree with you and also try to transmit to young people, I don't know if it was always like this, but I find in our days, because of the overpowering media that surrounds us all the time, also, we have models to which we aspire, and we think that we all have to be like them. But the people we see advertised most, the really, really big and famous people, they are actually the exceptions. And they probably made it in spite of everything or for completely different reasons. And I think it's a big mistake to compare ourselves to, I don't know, I used to play violin at school. If I always think I should have a career like Anne-Sophie Mutter or Maxim Vengerov, and I used to think that when I went to school, but now I realize it's a total mistake. Because, like you say, there are millions of people who do music in thousands of different ways. And that's also, I think, really water on your mill. The point is not to like compare you with some strange image, unreal image of somebody, but to look into yourself and to find, why are you doing music? Do you have a vocation? Under what circumstances can you do what makes you feel that you realize yourself in the best way? And particularly, I always say to young people, look, if you can afford to live from your music, be it by teaching, be it by lecturing, be it by playing concerts in small venues, being by playing in an orchestra, you've already made such a huge step, because probably, I don't know, 80 or 90 or more percent of people who study at a music college, they'll never be able to live off their music. So if you can make a living of it, you've already reached maybe the peak of peaks. And to become Anna-Sophie Mutter or a Vengerov or a Christian Zimmermann is a totally different thing, which can't be construed and has completely different reasons, you know. And it's like we're being presented an image of something that we aspire to, which is like a mirage or something.
Mm. Thank you so much for saying it in this way. So beautifully put. And yes, that's exactly why I wanted to have this conversation with you, because I think there's a lot of misinformation, misunderstandings, misconceptions about what an agent's role is and what the artist's role is within an agency as well. And sort of like, what is our responsibility? What is the agent's responsibility? And it was so interesting for me speaking with you this summer. And actually, it's very interesting for me speaking with you now after the summer, because I have gone from self managing to signing with an agent, but it was done in a way that works for me. And you're right, having self-managed for so long, which was really quite a conscious choice, I felt that it was really important for me to learn the business aspect of this side. I mean, I say business aspect because that's kind of the best way to say it. But there's just so much that goes into performing and quote unquote being a concert performing traveling artist that has nothing to do with your instrument. It's about networking. It's about being conversational with people. It's about learning basic social skills, I think, which, first of all, does not come naturally to everyone. It's also not things we're taught in school. And it was always something that I realized it was really important. Like when I was a child, I was very shy, I was very quiet. Speaking to strangers or networking or this kind of stuff, that does not come naturally. It did not come naturally to me. I have grown through the years, come out of my shell, and I actually very much enjoy talking to people now because I find it the most genuine way to connect on a human level is just having a conversation. That being said, it's still not the part of my quote unquote career that I want to be focusing my time on, right? I should be practicing. I should be learning new repertoire. I should be developing my craft. But as you say, like it's actually really important to learn all of these aspects because first of all, it makes for a more complete human being and therefore more complete artist. But also it's kind of like in a relationship, one person cannot play multiple roles in someone's life, right? The concept of diversifying, I think, is in a way very necessary, whether it's between agent and artist or whether it's between artist and multiple agents. But I don't know, it feels like also maybe a lot of pressure in a way, at least in the past, to have the artist expect that the agent is now going to do everything. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I mean, this has changed completely. I remember when I started working in the dramaturgy department in Zurich Opera, and there were still the very big American agencies, Columbia and so forth. They used to send press packs, sort of A4 format of each artist, even if they were only standing in and singing two performances. And there were maybe 5 huge black and white photos. I always wondered what to do with them because they were too big to scan and they didn't fit in any of our drawers. So I ended up throwing them away. And then they sent page-long CVs. They also sent, of course, the measurements, reviews, like a whole sort of a press pack. And this completely changed. Nowadays, the artist has to do that, and the artist has to either provide it himself or give it to the agent who then just passes it on. So the business side has, of course, also for financial reasons and crisis being all over, a lot of the work has been shoved over to the artist. Like everything in our lives, I mean, I do most of my former bank manager's work nowadays. I do all my payments, I do my bookkeeping, I don't know what, or I book my flights with whatever via the internet. I do a lot of work that before other people did. And the same applies for artists. Some are good at doing it. Some are completely incapable, which is normal. And I think the difficult thing is to be aware of it and then find out what can you take over and what can you entrust somebody with. And then if you entrust him, can you trust him and just let him be and let him work and not be suspicious all the time that he's kind of trying to cheat you or trick you. I'll give you a very simple example. You know that I always say languages are important. One has to learn languages. Also, because, I studied Russian at university, and then in the sort of 90s, early 2000s, when many Russian artists came to Europe, I often had to translate for them, mainly on rehearsals. And then, of course, they said, well, you have to help me because I've got a problem. I've got a row with the artistic office. They're cheating me because I should have paid for my apartment or my flight or something. So I read their contracts and realized they were mistaken. So they had either not understood what is written in the contract because they didn't know the language, or they had a bad communication with the management. But instead of solving the problem, they just assumed automatically they were being cheated by somebody and were going to make a row, which I would have had to translate, rather than taking over responsibility and A, reading the contract closely, and B, double checking whether the manager had negotiated with the theatre what they actually wanted. So that's a very simple example, but that's also a very frequent moment where the coordination between manager and artist goes wrong.
Hmm.
Another, yes, I wanted to say also a lot has to do with awareness of the artist or the artist himself. Recently, a conductor I work with was applying for a job and had to go for an interview, a real job interview, which you think is maybe it's strange because he's a musician. Why should he go and speak to 10 people like the rest of the world does? But he had to go for a job interview. And I said, write for me, please, in a few lines, 5 lines, if you are asked what your artistic profile is, how you differ from everybody else, because there's millions of young, talented conductors without work. How do you differ? And also send me 5 lines about this, because if I write to promoters and try to get you an engagement, I need to explain why they have to engage you. And it was very interesting that he seemed to have great difficulties in writing this about himself, which is something that I, from my university days or having had to apply to other jobs or from teaching and so forth, do not frequently, but from time to time. And that at least I know this kind of a concept exists. And then I encountered it with another musician also, that there's also a degree of self-reflection often missing among artists.
That's a very interesting and actually, I think, very accurate point. I think a lot of people don't have self awareness and self reflection. And I think that as artists, again, going back to sort of this societal industry model of what it means to be successful, we're told that we should only aspire to have a career like so and so, I don't know, Zimmerman or Argerich or whatever, that having something else or not having that kind of career means we're unsuccessful. So then, if we're trying to constantly be someone else, trying to act like someone else, we're not being ourselves. We're not acting like ourselves. We don't even know who we are. So then, how are we able to even tell someone what value we bring to the table? It's very much related to my podcast and the things that I speak about on this podcast, because learning to understand our own worth and being able to value ourselves from within, recognizing that every human being has different strengths, different qualities, and we all bring something to the table in different ways. And so trying to discover what it is that is unique about us and what makes us interesting, but not from the outside, but what we believe in, what we're passionate about, what is meaningful to us. People see that from the outside when it's genuine.
Absolutely. And I mean, I also feel very passionate about this because you need to take it even further. Because if you don't have any self awareness, what are you going to share with me as an audience? What are you going to tell me? And how do you explain to me why you're playing a half an hour long sonata from the 1880s, which is difficult and for many maybe even boring or so, and you feel absolutely thrilled about it? How do you bring it across to me? So you need to have a kind of an insight, an introspection, and then a way. You also will need technical means, of course, to bring it across and to share it with me and bring this passion across. Because I think one of the big problems of classical music is that it's become so kind of abstracted and cerebral that most people think it's boring and not for them. Whereas pop music, even for me, are often of a inferior quality, is something that touches people. And I think that is where the connection needs to be made between your soul and what you can bring to the music and bring the emotion in the music or the sense of the music across to me. Of course, with all the knowledge, with I don't know, having read up about the composer, about the piece, the style, having perfected your technique, and so on. But the real work starts once you decide which piece you're going to learn. You need a reason, and then how you play it in order to tell me something about it. Because otherwise it's boring, or otherwise I can just listen to the old Rubinstein records, which are presumably better than most people's anyway. So why should I bother go to your concert and listen to you speaking to me?
Right. Very, very much so. And I know we spoke about this in the summer as well, but I think the reason why pop music is so popular is also because words are often easier to make a connection with than just instrumental music. And I think personally that classical music is the type of music that touches us in the deepest part of our souls. It allows us to access the deepest parts of our emotions. But there are a lot of people in this world who don't know how to access those emotions, who don't know who they are inside, who don't know how to discover what they're feeling. I remember I read something recently that said overthinking is underfeeling. And I felt like it was so applicable for every single aspect of life.
I totally agree. And also, I think because in our modern world, a lot of what classical music contains is constantly being hammered out of our awareness. For instance, everything is loud and getting louder. Everything is very rhythmical, but usually sort of straight rhythms, like basses in discos that go boom, 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 like this. There's hardly anything sweet. There's hardly anything pianissimo. There's hardly anything long. Also, because of course nowadays concentration span of people has deteriorated incredibly. So if they have to listen to a Mahler symphony of more than an hour, it's difficult. It's difficult for me as well. I freely admit that. We've become very, very visual. We're not used to listening carefully anymore. So, like, you need to kind of touch people's souls and emotions in a way to make them vulnerable in this sense again and sensitive. And that's very difficult because the real world keeps sort of hammering out all the time.
I very much agree with you. And I think you said we don't listen properly. What we miss in audiences today is active listening, meaning allowing yourself to be present, allowing yourself to experience whatever concert situation you are in the present moment, because that moment exists only in that second and it will never be repeated again. And that is the magic of live music. That is the magic of classical music, I think.
But also, like the audience energy you get, like if you go to, I don't know, a Bach oratorio, the audience energy you get is different from the energy in a pop concert where everybody dances and puts their arms up in the air with candles and bounces around. That's also cool, but it's a completely different range of emotion, which you don't get in much of pop or rock music, merely because of the space. Also, I think it's a very important point because of it being acoustic or not acoustic. So, of course, classical music, if somebody moves you in a wooden, medium sized concert hall with a beautiful violin sound or a beautiful touch of the piano, sometimes people, when they just play the first chord and you get shivers all over, it's an incredible experience which you can't get with electronically amplified music. So this is like a whole world on which much of the world is missing out.
Yes, that is so, so true. I mean, the magic of sound, the aliveness of sound, the energy in acoustic sound, it's unparalleled with anything else. And I think that's a very important point. I also always wonder, I mean, these are just my personal musings, but I always wonder if, like with classical music, like I said, like it goes to truly like the deepest parts of us. Of course, there are people that say it's elitist, that it's too highbrow, that it's not popular. Okay, fine. It does require a certain willingness to experience something different if you've not been raised with classical music or if it's not been part of your musical education. But I also feel like, except for opera, because there are no words with instrumental classical music, it makes us access a different part of our brain. And it requires kind of a similar inward introspection like meditation. And in a world that is increasingly, as you say, louder, more chaotic, faster, more visual, more instant gratification, instant satisfaction, looking up something on Google in 2 seconds, asking ChatGPT to write a whole essay, whatever. in this kind of fast paced world, I feel like there's less and less inner reflection, inner introspection. And I always wonder if there's a parallel there with classical music versus with pop music, which, like you say, when you go to a pop concert and it's electronic, the energy of it is loud, is moving, is collective. And I would say that classical music is 100% a collective experience because it is a collaborative experience with you and the music, you and the energy, you and the audience within themselves, the audience and the energy, the audience and the acoustics. Everything is connected, but somehow it leaves room for one to have that inner world experience while being part of a collective. I don't know if that makes any sense at all, but it's just my personal musings.
No, it doesn't. I absolutely agree. I just think one of the problems of classical music is also a lot of social prejudice. And I think in my experience, I don't know so much about it, but I think it comes a lot from pop culture, which in my mind comes from America and England also, where it is just connected with the upper classes or educated people. And education is also socially prejudiced nowadays. So one kind of feels proud if one says, oh, this is rubbish and inaccessible, rather than thinking this could be for me too. I have a very weird example for me, absolutely weird, but it's sort of the reality. My uncle, he played for many, many years and decades in a string quartet in London. And he said they used to have a representative from the Labour Party who was a big fan and used to come to all the string quartet concerts, whom they knew because he came to so many concerts. And at a certain point, he got elected into Parliament, after which he didn't go to the concerts anymore. And I asked my uncle why, and he said, because in England, if you're a Labour Party MP, you can't show yourself in a classical music concert. Sort of, it's like classical music is considered elitist and belongs to the Tories, to the Conservatives and the upper class. So, like, they'd be worried to lose votes and lose support from people who adhere to the Labour Party. And also after that, after having become an MP, the man didn't go to string quartet concerts anymore. It's totally ridiculous. I mean, for me, it's outrageous, but it shows that a lot has to do in many countries with social prejudice. And I think this is something we absolutely need to fight for and say it's not elitist. And of course, you have to learn certain things about it, but you need to learn things about any kind of music. But it's got nothing to do with elitist or difficult or whatever.
Arts and culture, music, arts, culture, and politics should never be mixed. It has nothing to do with politics. And actually, I've spoken about this very topic with two previous guests on this season, Sir Andras Schiff and Denis
Mhm.
Kojuchin. And in two very different conversations, the topic of arts and politics came up. And it just, for me, they don't mix. They shouldn't have anything to do with each other. Music and culture, language, history, art, these are all cultural things that enhance society and enhance one's connection with oneself and connection with others. Has nothing to do with politics and should never be politicized, I think.
Well, I think culture should be politicized in a way that it has cultural, social political power and that it can bring people together social politically. And I think nowadays that we have so many problems everywhere which are social political, we should use culture more for bringing people together and not sticking strange labels on it, or even wokish labels sometimes, and try to ban it from everywhere, including schools and public places and so on. But we should make use of it because it's the only thing that can bring people together. I'm not only speaking about classical music now, but culture in general. And also, I found an interesting example during the pandemic. We didn't have a very big lockdown in Switzerland, but we had a little bit of a lockdown. And I was very annoyed when the interior minister, when it started to reopen, said, oh, now it's fantastic. Now we can go out again and do sport because sport is so important for the mental health of people and for the welfare of people and so on. And I thought, hey, excuse me, she didn't lose a word about culture. But while people were locked in, those who didn't go crazy, all they did was culture. They read books, they watched films, they listened to music, they played music, they conversed, they called their friends on the telephone and had a chat and so forth. That's all culture. So what got us through the really difficult bit, where everything was totally closed down and we couldn't go jogging, was actually culture. And that was a time where everybody started discussing of closing down culture because of all the financial problems during and after the pandemic. And I thought it's totally ridiculous because for me, the culture comes before sport. Sport is for your body. And of course, your endorphins and whatever, it starts getting going. But when you can't do sport, then you do culture.
I couldn't agree more, truly couldn't agree more. And we know, both of us being in this industry, how much culture we tried to continue through the pandemic. I did online concerts. My colleagues, we were all doing online concerts or going to a concert hall and playing for cameras. Like we all did this because that is what was exactly what you said. That is what was carrying people forward. Because music, culture, art, something creative, it gives us hope.
Hmm.
It's a beacon
Hmm.
of light and a symbol of hope and faith and love and unity.
It is absolutely. It is absolutely. I mean, we got a bit further away from the management issue, but I mean, for me, it means that the managers and the artists have to work on this awareness a lot, and they have to put more into that, and not be bothered whether they earn 1,800 or 1,850 euros or not, or whether they think their agent lost them some engagement or something. These are all issues that are also important, but the major issue is much more global, you know. We have to prove that we are not irrelevant, and we have to prove that we are not only doing this for fun. And I think especially classical music maneuvered itself a little into the entertainment corner, I think, because they thought nobody goes to hear it and people aren't so interested, so they like lowered their standards and went into entertainment rather than saying that the value of classical music is much higher, and it isn't simple. It is entertainment as well, but not simply. It's something that does influence your mental health and your general welfare and your inner peace and the way you behave to other people and so on. It's really something much bigger than mere going out for a good night, which it can also be. I'm not against it, but it just has a much bigger mission and a bigger meaning for me.
I'm actually really glad you used the word entertainment because you're right. We are in some way entertainers, but I think a lot of classical musicians detest that word and we worry about being viewed in that way. And this brings me to something that I did want to ask you about in the agent artist relationship role, which is about power dynamics. I do want to touch briefly on this because I think it's very, very important. I think part of the bad reputation that some agencies or some managers have had in our world is because there are some instances where instead of protecting and advising the artist, the manager or agency abuse and take advantage of the artist. And I do want to talk about this because it's important for young artists, especially those that are starting out. And this happens in the pop industry as well. Like so many artists speak about, having signed 10-year contracts when they were 17 that only now they're able to get out of. And okay, so it happens everywhere in the entertainment industry. If you can give some advice for younger artists, what to sort of be looking out for when they're starting a new relationship, maybe with a big agency or maybe with a big manager, and they themselves, the artist, are quite green. So they may not know what is okay, what is acceptable. And I'm not even talking about sexual abuse. I'm not even going there in this moment. I'm talking just specifically about when are they allowed to say no and not be afraid that if they say no, I don't want to do that concert. No, I don't want to do that project. No, that doesn't feel right for me, that the agent won't say, well, then we're going to drop you, or, well, then you're never going to have concerts, or something like this, that kind of that power dynamic, that imbalance of power. What would you advise for younger musicians today?
Well, I would say, if I needed to generalize it, that it's a very good point, which brings us maybe back to the beginning of this conversation again, because if you understand the mechanics of the business, and if you understand what the other side, let's say, is doing, your manager or the concert organizer, then you have obviously the power to discuss or to argue. Then you can either decide to be confrontational and say, no, I'm not going to do this. And then you might lose something. That's your choice. Or if you're more the diplomatic type, you will try and find a diplomatic solution. I would advise to always ask questions and always ask the other party to justify or to explain it to you. If there is something like if you need to sign a contract which lasts 10 years, ask, must it be 10 years? Or maybe ask other people, is that really a law or is that what is common? Question things and try and discuss it so long with the person till you are convinced. And if you're not convinced in the end, you make your choice and then you say, sorry, I'm not prepared to do this. And then if I lose the relationship or the concert or whatever, or the record, then that's it. But it doesn't suit me. So I think, yeah, my advice would be ask as many questions as possible, have them explain it to you till you understand it. Don't be afraid of questioning everything. You can question everything, really. If you don't understand it, ask them to do it in a different language, in different words, whatever. And then if you don't agree, say you don't agree, and then, make a different choice. I think nowadays the world is big enough that if, for instance, somebody doesn't want to work with you anymore, then there'll be other people who will want to work with you. But you have to be interested and you have to participate. It's, of course, comfortable to hand everything over to an agent or somebody and say, you just fill my calendar. I also know artists who do that. But I find it frustrating from the point of view of manager. And I also think it'll always end in conflict after a while, because at some point you will still not be happy with what you think the agent should have done, but you never gave him instructions and you never accompanied him on the way.
Thank you for sharing this. I very much agree because I think that no one can truly know us the way we know ourselves. So, no matter how much you trust another person, and to be able to have unconditional trust in, for example, an agent, which is not a family member or a life partner, which even then, having unconditional trust is a huge leap of faith. But to have unconditional trust and to put that unconditional trust into someone in a business working relationship, and that's why I said earlier, like, where does that professional line start and end? That's a really big thing. So I agree with you. I think it's very important to know. That's why, I mean, it goes back to also knowing yourself, to know yourself, know what you want, know what's right for you, and be willing to have those conversations, to ask advice and be challenged. And I'm learning this with my own manager now. So I am someone that very much likes to have autonomy and the choice to make my decisions, because I feel that I know myself better than anyone else can, including my parents, including my sister, including my best friends, right? I mean, ultimately, I will only know myself the best. And so sometimes, let's say there's a situation for this concert here or this concert there, and let's say the fee that they offer is a bit low. And my manager knows that. I know that. I will ask her now. In the past, I would ask maybe trusted friends and colleagues. I would talk to my parents. I would try to do a little bit of research. What is the general fee in this country or in this region or with this organization? What are people getting on an average? And then I can kind of suss things out. And I also am very aware of where I am in my career versus somebody who is twice my age and much farther along, right? So I also have that kind of perspective. But now, for example, I'll write to my agent when she comes back with something and I'll say, doesn't this feel too low? Like, what do you think about this? Do you think this is worth it? And I will listen to her advice. And sometimes I will say, I really appreciate your advice, but I think that this is not right for me. And sometimes I'll say, you know what? Thank you. I didn't think about it that way. I will say yes. And what I really appreciate now in this new relationship with my manager, which, yes, it's new, it's a small boutique agency, it's exactly what works for me because it feels individualized, it feels personalized. It feels that she has my best interests at heart. It feels that she has my back, that she trusts that I know myself, and I trust that she knows the industry. So far, it's a very nice symbiosis between the two of us. And I feel that I can trust her judgment. At the same time, there's still a lot that I do. I'm very proactive with her. I follow up with things. I say, hey, like, can we have a conversation? I want to talk about this. These are my goals here. Can you help me make it happen? So I think having self-managed in my life for so long has led me to understand what responsibilities I need to take and what I can now delegate and lift a little bit of that weight of having to do everything by myself off my shoulders.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely perfect what you say, and in your case, and I'm sure, of course, you work on a different level because you are so experienced and you have advanced well into your career. You know what you need, what you want, what you can do. You need like a partner on the same level as you that you can basically discuss things with, and who then goes and acts in your favor. I have experiences with different types of artists. Some really want the feedback of every little step that I do. And they call me and say, did you ring so and so? And did so and so ring back? And what did they say? And blah, blah, blah. Sometimes it stresses me a bit. And then I have artists who I know they are very cool, and I just send them, look, I just got a concert engagement in there and there. They can only pay so and so much, but they'll pay you the hotel. I got a hotel out of it also. Is that all right? And then they say yes. So it's like a dynamic, and it's a take and give, and also it develops over time, like you said, according to how the trust with the person grows and the feel with the person. And it's individual in every different case, of course.
Very individual. And I'm sure it also changes if, for example, you have a long time relationship with an artist, as they also change and develop and grow through their career. I'm sure it also changes the dynamic between you and the artist, right?
Absolutely. And also, like everybody, somebody gets ill, or they fall in love, or they get divorced, or they move to a different country, or whatever. And that sort of changes the whole dynamic. So, although on the one hand, it is a business, and business is very tough and runs according to certain laws and rules, it is also like a human relationship, which in a way is like any relationship. And maybe because you were also saying about the line between friendship and non-friendship. I'm very bad personally at conflicts, and I'm very bad at keeping a distance, really. So I like to feel that I'm more or less friends with my artists. And sometimes it gets me into trouble, but in other cases, I think it is also very good because you do then create this kind of level of trust. But then sometimes you need to just remind yourself that it is a kind of a business relationship, and you need to keep a certain distance, or you need to be able to talk soberly about business issues, like if I don't perform and they want to fire me, or if I want to fire them. But in general, I would say, of course, for me, how I am as a personality and a character, it's nicer to have a sort of a friendly relationship with the artists. Which doesn't mean that I send them Christmas cards and stuff and birthday cards all the time, because I usually forget, but just that in the conversation that you feel there is a sort of a special relationship. And also that they feel they are not number 17 on the list of 35, I think that's important psychologically.
I think you said it so beautifully. It is yet another human relationship. And with any sort of human relationship, I think the most important thing for each party is that they just want to be seen and heard and recognized for who they are.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's an ongoing learning process always. And I think constantly developing within the industry and within our world as times change. But I thank you truly for being here with us today, for sharing your expertise and your insight and your experience with us. I think it was also for me a very interesting conversation last summer and continued today. And I thank you truly for being here and sharing with us.
You're welcome, and thank you very much. I absolutely agree. It's very inspiring to talk with you and to listen to your program. It gives oneself a lot to think about and to learn more about oneself as well.
Thank you all so much for listening. I am truly grateful for the support from each and every one of you. If you would like to submit any questions or topics for us to address on the show, you can send us a message on our Instagram page @Conscious Artist Podcast. Help us to spread more awareness by sharing this episode with your friends, your colleagues, your teachers, and your students. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Sending you all so much love and strength to tackle this week, and we'll see you next Monday for another episode of The Conscious Artist.